I'm joined now by All Rise News' Adam Klasfeld. Adam, we have some major news out of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The last news that we had was that a three-judge panel, including two Trump-appointed judges, had overruled a lower court judge in Oregon, Judge Immergut, who, by the way, Trump himself appointed, allowing for Trump's troop deployment. We now have a major update in that case. Can you explain what just happened?
Absolutely. Well, the Ninth Circuit's full bench has overturned that three-judge panel's order, effectively reinstating Judge Immergut's order, blocking the troop deployment of the National Guard to Portland, right in time for a trial in Portland to extend that order, permanently blocking Trump's troop deployment.
Now, in terms of the trial here, that's going to give us our decision on the merits. And so all of these decisions that we've had thus far are really just on temporary restraining orders so that we could get to trials on the merit. But now that issue is finally going to be decided. Is that correct?
That's correct. And as we speak, Brian, there are people on the witness stand. There's a commander of the Portland police force who is testifying right now, saying essentially that the situation was under control since June when this was happening. The testimony is ongoing, so we'll see where it goes. But what we've seen so far is that in the days leading up to Trump's activation of the National Guard, it was quiet in Portland. They're sending people in to the witness stand. The state of Oregon is sending people to the witness stand to testify to the scene to get the long-term injunction that will permanently block Trump from sending in the troops based on that record.
Adam, importantly, how does the fact that the full Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals agreed to overturn the three-judge panel on this issue and continue to block Trump from being able to send in the troops, what does that suggest when they rule on the merits? Clearly, it's not going to help them, but how much of an impact does something like that have?
Well, it's an extraordinary action that you said even earlier, Brian, that we're in the preliminary stages for the full court, for an en banc court to intervene at this stage means that they think that the original panel was so misguided that they had to intervene at this stage. And it comes right after Trump's DOJ had to admit in an embarrassing two-page letter that the statistic that they cited in order to justify sending the troops to Portland was entirely bogus. They had claimed that about a quarter, 25%, of the Federal Protective Services had to be diverted to Portland because the scene was so chaotic there that everything, in order to maintain the peace, they had to send about a quarter of the Federal Protective Services. Well, in a letter just before the en banc court's ruling, they had to admit that was wrong. It wasn't 115 officers. Actually, they were double counting officers in some instances, and they were more like 86. And then they go farther and said, well, it's not even 86 because some of the 86 officers weren't inspectors, inspectors being the type of people who are there on the ground actually protecting the property. So it's not 25%, it's more like 13.1%. Courts don't like to be misled, and here the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, the entire en banc bench, intervened immediately and said we're going to reinstate the federal judge's order. And that's probably why we're at the stage we are right now.
Well, you say that courts don't like to be lied to, but really the Trump administration, this whole case is predicated in a bad faith argument. I mean, anybody with eyes could look at this and see that none of the planks, none of the conditions for a domestic troop deployment were met. Like, there is no foreign invasion, there is no rebellion, there is no failure of the local government to effectuate its laws. These protests are like 12 people outside of an ice facility in Portland. Half of these people are wearing frog costumes and unicorn costumes. And so when you say that the court doesn't like to be lied to, I mean, the whole case feels like the court is being lied to, right? Like, can you
Right.
give your thought on that?
I think there's the one proposition of a ridiculous argument, right? That the facts on the ground are so chaotic that you have to your honor send in the troops to maintain the regular order because we can't handle this with regular forces. That's an argument. To put numbers to it, to say we needed to send 115 Federal Protective Services officers. And to put that in a sworn declaration by one of your officers saying this was our staffing decision,
Hmm.
and to go back later and say, actually, that number was way off. We were double counting the officers that we were sending there. It's more like 86. And oops, by the way, it's not actually 86. It's less than that because not all of them were inspectors. And it's more like 13.1 within a months long period. That's a different level of deception. That's not just a bad faith argument. That is getting the wrong facts before the court. And we'll see if they take any further action, if they think any of that misinformation was a willing lie. If they do, that again, this is a sworn declaration by a government official. It's a different order of magnitude than a bad faith argument. This is flat out wrong information before the court. And they took action a couple of days after that admission.
So this is the same Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that's also hearing the Los Angeles case. And in fact, the full Ninth Circuit just refused to overturn a three-judge panel's decision as it relates to LA. So there's kind of analogous situations in Portland and Los Angeles. It's the same Circuit Court of Appeals. And so do you think that the fact that they have found the Trump administration to be lying to them in court will have any impact on the Los Angeles case, because they can recognize that this is not a party that is acting in good faith. In fact, it's not a party that even deserves the presumption of regularity that they're being given. So do you presume that what we're seeing in Portland is going to have some impact on how the same judges and the same circuit court perceive the Los Angeles case?
It very well might. And you said the words that matter here, the presumption of regularity. We're seeing around the country, and this has been observed by legal observers around the country, finding judges saying this presumption of regularity that we usually give the federal government because the DOJ, when they tell us these are the staffing decisions, we can trust that. We can't trust that anymore. It happened in the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, where you had Judge Zini saying that you have destroyed the presumption of regularity because they keep sending people that are misleading the court and lying to the court. We're seeing judges saying that time and again. And the fact that they gave the wrong numbers to the same Ninth Circuit panel that ruled in their favor could absolutely blow back in the Los Angeles case, because these are the judges that will eventually decide that case. The fact that this happened, that the DOJ, the Trump DOJ, had to give the corrected numbers, that happened after the Ninth Circuit gave a very, very highly deferential decision in the Trump administration's favor in the Los Angeles case. They'll probably be looking at all of those numbers and all of those stats much more skeptically going forward.
You know, there are a lot of cases in a lot of different courts in a lot of different cities happening right now. And I'm sure a lot of people who are watching are having trouble remembering what the updates are in each city, where everybody stands, what the rulings have been, who's up, who's down. So can you give a very simple explainer of what's happening in the cities right now as it relates to troop deployments and the judges' decisions in those cases?
Well, in Los Angeles, the National Guard are still allowed to be deployed. There was a ruling that have barred the troops from violating the Posse Comitatus Act, basically saying you cannot engage in civilian law enforcement. That too is under review. But as things stand now, Trump cannot deploy the troops into Portland. Trump cannot deploy the troops into Chicago. And all of this live controversy is before the Supreme Court, which still hasn't released a decision on their review of the Chicago ruling. So that's where things stand. Trump is on a losing streak on his deployment of the National Guard into U.S. cities. There is one victory that he's barely holding on to in Los Angeles, and he's hoping that the Supreme Court will rescue him once again.
In all of these cases, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Portland, have they only ruled thus far on allowing or staying, meaning blocking, the temporary restraining orders? The broader question I'm asking, have any of these courts ruled on the merits of these cases, or are we just in the beginning stages where they're just ruling on initial temporary restraining orders?
It's the latter. This is opening stages. We are now, as we speak, as I mentioned, in the middle of a trial in Oregon that will go into that order that has gone to a speedy trial, in part thanks to this en banc ruling in the Ninth Circuit that has reinstated the judge's temporary restraining order. The evidence is being gathered for a more full and final ruling that will resolve the issue there. And then that case, that record can keep going up all the way to the Supreme Court.
And finally, last question here, Adam. In terms of the Supreme Court, because they're obviously the presence looming above all of this, as you'd mentioned, the Chicago case was already appealed up to the Supreme Court, but as we also just spoke about, none of these decisions have been made on the merits. Do you have any reason to believe that the Supreme Court might already just jump in and kind of Bigfoot all of these cases and issue their ruling based on just the preliminary stages of the Chicago case? Or do you think that the Supreme Court is going to wait and see what happens when these trials on the merits take place and get decided on in Chicago, in Portland, in Los Angeles?
In a usual case, you would say it should obviously be the latter path, but
Right.
this Supreme Court. We've seen dozens of emergency docket rulings, shadow docket rulings, interim docket rulings, whatever you call it, where the Supreme Court intervenes and without explanation gives Trump what he wants. We'll see if that happens again here. But what we have seen in the kind of record being percolated right now is you're seeing Trump appointed judges from multiple courts saying that Trump has gone too far. You're seeing the Ninth Circuit giving detailed consideration. This isn't a court that has found entirely for or entirely against Trump. The Supreme Court can take a look at this and say, the local courts, the courts that are looking at this on the ground are trying to sort this out. Let's get this case when it is finally ready for our review and not intervene and not just hand Trump what he wants when he has us on speed dial, in the words of Justice Sotomayor in describing how they've used that emergency docket.
Well, Adam, as always, thank you so much for the wealth of information here. For those who are watching, if you'd like to support Adam's work, a small step that we can all take to support him and to support independent media more broadly is to sign up for All Rise News. That's the independent outlet that Adam himself started. He's not part of some multinational media conglomerate. He's on his own dime, going to different courthouses across the country, covering all of this news. And so again, if you're looking to support independent, fearless journalism, I could not recommend Adam highly enough. So I'm going to put that link again to All Rise News right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Adam, as always, thanks for the time.
Thank you so much, Brian.